what would Bitcoin have to go up at per year? Literally put together a spreadsheet and say, what's it at now? And let me make assumptions for the next 25 years. And if Bitcoin goes up at 50% per year, where does that put it 20 years from now, 25, whatever?
Mhm.
And then say, okay, if a Bitcoin is going to be worth, $10 million per Bitcoin, what is Bitcoin's total market cap? And that one's easy math. If Bitcoin is 10 million, that's 215 trillion, because you're 10 million times 21 million Bitcoin, right? So could Bitcoin be a $200 trillion total asset in roughly 20 years, let's just say?
Mhm.
I think that's possible, but now you have to say, well, let's compare that to other assets. Gold is like a $30 trillion asset today. So could Bitcoin be like 15 times the size of gold? I mean, it could. I don't think that's crazy. Also, remember that what is the total size of all the monetary assets out there? We've all seen
Yep.
these charts before, and it's like a little under a quadrillion. It's
Mhm.
like 900 something trillion is what the total pie is. So then you have to start to say, what is Bitcoin as a percentage of the total? And we've seen these, it's like, Bitcoin is less than 0.5% today. So then you have to start saying, if Bitcoin's going to be 10 million per coin, what is it going to be as a percentage of everything? If it gets up to 200 trillion, what is that? What is the total pie going to increase at per year? Is it going to, you have to make an assumption, 5%, 10%, 7%? I just say 7%. And then if my own numbers show that if Bitcoin hits 10 million per coin 20 years from now, and it's a $200 trillion asset, it's still less than 10% of global financial assets. So I think
Mhm.
this is potentially grounded in reality. But then the next big thing you have to do is say, okay, everything you want to spend in your life is going to get more expensive, right? Homes are getting more expensive. Your kid's school is getting more expensive. Healthcare is getting more expensive. Taking your family on a vacation is getting more expensive, like on and on and on, right?
Yeah.
So then you have to say, okay, homes are going to increase by 5% per year. So the home that I want to buy today, that's $500,000. Well, that might be over a million, 20 years from now. So you have to actually put pen to paper on all this stuff. And I think final comment where this stuff gets tricky is some people say, oh, if you have this much Bitcoin, you're set for life. And I think that is a very that's too vague a way of talking about it, because one person's set for life is completely different than another.
Mm.
Uh, does your set for life mean you want to have 7 kids and you want, your wife to stay home with them, and you want to take them all on a vacation every single year, and you want to have a lake house, and you want to everyone to have a car, and you want to send them to private college for whatever reason? That's a totally, 0.1 Bitcoin's probably not going to get you that. if you want to have 1 kid and live a very frugal lifestyle, then, and that's your set for life, then, we're kind of answering 2 completely different questions is my point.
Yeah, and a lot of it goes back to financial literacy, and just in general. And this goes back to a lot of our conversation today of just, you got to put in the work. The work has to be done regardless. Upholding the network, et cetera, et cetera. Defining what you want in your life, the intentionality, the hard work. It's everything. It just always seems to come back to that. You kind of touched on it really, really quick there, just with like the 900 trillion. One of my last questions here was what's the end game for Bitcoin? Like 100 years from now, or it could be 1,000 years from now, or 50 years from now. I don't know when it is, but what do you think the end game is for Bitcoin? Like the final resting stop? Is it, as I know, Jeff Booth's always, it's got to account for every dollar. It's going to account for that 900 trillion to 1 quadrillion. It's got to account for all that. Jack Mallers is always, hey, it's 1/2 of every trade. So 450 trillion is its final resting spot. Like how do you see it truly at the end of the day? Like the final end game, the final resting spot for Bitcoin?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think I view it as base money. So, for example, if you look at like all the dollars in the world, there's not 900 trillion base dollars like sitting in a bank account
Right.
somewhere or sitting on the central bank, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
these things that are valued in the 900 trillion, like there's a home that is worth that amount.
Yep.
There's some guy who owns a deli in your town, and the deli might be worth $1 million as a business.
Mm-hmm.
That doesn't mean $1 million exists somewhere. So it's like all the things that we own, like household net worth, basically across the whole world is like 900 trillion. So I don't know if Bitcoin captures that. I for this one, I like Saylor's thesis, which is like, look at all the assets that are performing a monetary store of value function, and then assume that Bitcoin over time can capture a healthy percentage of that. So homes are always going to be on that $900 trillion chart. There's always going to be people storing value in a home. It's just that the Bitcoiner thesis is saying, hey, this is overinflated right now. So let's take some monetary premium away from that. So I'm of the belief that Bitcoin will continue to grow as a share. Hard for me to put a number on it, like with a date. I would, when I've seen Saylor present this, I think he's accurate in saying, look at the monetary assets and Bitcoin, make your own assumption about what share of that Bitcoin is going to get over a 5, 10, 30-year period.
I know you got to run here. My last thought or question to you is, is there anything that is worrisome to you? Or, we've talked about, a fair amount of bullish things like that. Obviously there's the knots versus core. Bitcoin always has infighting going on. Is there anything that worries you, or, humans not caring about sound money, like whatever, like just across the spectrum inside of Bitcoin or that world that worries you or scares you?
I will give you my things that potentially concern me about Bitcoin. It would be, I do think, and I'm not trying to FUD here, but I do think we have to acknowledge that there's potentially some sort of quantum computing threat at some point in time. I think we have to be very humble about the fact that the number of humans on Earth who probably understand quantum computing and where it's headed and how it affects Bitcoin is not a big number. But I think it has to be on your list of potential concerns for Bitcoin on like a multi-decade time horizon, right? So that's on my list, but it's not something I'm losing sleep over.
Yeah.
What I think could potentially would be a problem is if those big custodians that are the institutional service providers for large holders, so it's Coinbase, it's BitGo, it's Anchorage, it's Fidelity, right? If there was a major custodian failure and an entity lost, tens of thousands of Bitcoin, billions of dollars worth of Bitcoin, firstly, for starters, I would say you have to remember that doesn't affect, the Bitcoin that an individual has in his or her hardware wallet, right? Like he or she can still send that Bitcoin the same day as the institutional custodian loses Bitcoin. So it doesn't affect the network from like a functionality perspective. But from a narrative perspective, if there was a large institutional entity like an ETF or something where they just said, hey, we had our custodian had a failure and the Bitcoin is gone from this ETF, just for example, that would be a huge narrative problem for Bitcoin. I think it would kind of smack people in the face and be like, hey, are you sure you want, it would scare them into being like, hey, this is a bearer asset and you can just lose it. And don't you want the comfort of fiat, knowing that your fiat can't just disappear? And Bitcoin would have to deal with that type of a narrative. Again, I don't expect this to happen. I would put this at like a sub 2% chance of happening. But when I just try to brainstorm what would be something really bad to happen to Bitcoin from a narrative perspective, it would be like a true custodian failure where billions of dollars of Bitcoin is lost.
If you like that clip, then you definitely got to check out this next spicy clip. I think you're really going to like it. Come on, check it out. But if you want the full version, the full interview, then check that out over here. Come on, do it. I'll see you in there.